I sat at the elegant dining table in my sister-in-law Nina's home, located in Nashville, where we had gathered for our monthly family brunch. My husband James, with an unsettling smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, turned to me and asked, "Don't you want to try the coffee I made just for you, honey?" The cup in front of me gave off an unusual, almost metallic scent, something that immediately turned my stomach. At 29, I never thought I'd find myself questioning whether my own husband might be trying to harm me. Yet, after 3 years of marriage and a string of what could only be considered accidental food poisonings, I had learned to be cautious, especially around Nina. She had a peculiar way of setting things up that always left me feeling either sick or embarrassed, always accompanied by that same innocent smile James was wearing at that moment. With a forced smile, I replied, "How thoughtful of you," though my mind was racing. The aroma from the cup was unlike any coffee I had ever smelled before. It reminded me of the time just last month when I ended up in urgent care after drinking tea at Nina's house. The doctors couldn't explain my symptoms, and Nina had insisted she made the tea exactly how she made her own. Across the table, Nina watched me carefully, stirring her untouched coffee absent-mindedly. "James has really gotten into making coffee lately," she remarked with a sly grin. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she stressed, "for you," sent a shiver down my spine. I had noticed James spending more time at Nina's house recently, claiming they were preparing a surprise for our anniversary. But something didn't sit right. There were whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room, strange texts on his phone that I caught glimpses of, and now, this strange cup of coffee. I lifted the cup, pretending to take a sip while observing their expressions closely. James and Nina exchanged a brief, significant glance that confirmed my growing suspicions. Trying to keep calm, I made a show of checking my phone before standing up suddenly. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to make a quick call for work. Nina, would you mind if I use your study for a moment?" As I walked past Nina's place setting, I intentionally stumbled, using the moment to switch our coffee cups as I steadied myself. "I'm so sorry," I said quickly, straightening up. "I'm such a klutz sometimes." Nina waved off my apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to break anything in the study," she said, her voice tight. I nodded and hurried away, my heart racing. Through the study doorway, I could still see them sitting at the table. Now, all I had to do was wait and observe. From the doorway, I watched as Nina brought the coffee cup to her lips, my stomach tightening in dread. A part of me wanted to scream and stop her, but I needed to know the truth. Too many nights in emergency rooms, too many hours spent in pain, all after meals shared with them. It hadn't always been this way. When I first met James at a wedding in Nashville 3 years ago, he was charming and attentive. Nina had been welcoming, inviting me to family events and even offering to help plan our wedding. Looking back, I now realize I should have noticed the signs, small things at first, like her accidentally spilling drinks on my dress during important events, or how my meals always seemed to have extra seasoning whenever she helped cook. At first, it was nothing more than an upset stomach here or a mild allergic reaction there. James always had a reason ready, like, "Maybe it's something you ate earlier," or "You must be coming down with something." But the pattern had become too obvious to ignore. The worst incident had occurred 2 months ago when I was hospitalized after breakfast at their house. Doctors found traces of something in my system that they couldn't identify, but James had convinced everyone that I had taken expired medication by mistake. I gripped the doorframe of the study, watching Nina carefully as she took another sip of the coffee. James was distracted, typing on his phone as if nothing was wrong. My own cup, still untouched, sat cold on the table where I had left it. The metallic scent still lingered in my nostrils, making me shudder. Suddenly, a slight tremor shook Nina's hand. She set down the cup and paled, her face losing all color. "James," she said, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong." James looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to pure horror as he realized which cup she had been drinking from. He jumped to his feet, knocking over his chair in the process. "Nina, what's happening?" he asked, panic in his voice. Nina was shaking uncontrollably now. I feel," she stuttered, trying to stand but stumbling as she reached for the table for support. "What did you put in that coffee?" I demanded, stepping out of the study, my phone already recording. James was at Nina's side now, his face ashen. "That wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered, though in the silence of the dining room, his words were loud and clear. Nina's eyes widened in fear and realization. "Call an ambulance," she gasped, her body crumpling to the floor. "Please, I can't." Despite the chaos unfolding in front of me, my hands remained steady as I dialed 911. Nina lay on the floor, writhing with violent tremors, while James stood helpless, his face full of dread. James knelt down beside her, his face marked by a visible sense of panic as the full weight of their failed plan hit him. "Emergency services?" "Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," I said clearly, holding my phone in one hand while keeping the recording going with the other. "My sister-in-law seems to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's awake but experiencing tremors." As I spoke to the dispatcher, Nina's eyes locked onto mine. The usual icy calculation in her gaze was replaced by something far more unsettling, pure fear. "Christina," she gasped. "You switched it? You knew." The dispatcher's calm voice came through. "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way. Please stay on the line." James, his panic escalating, turned toward Nina. "What's happening? This wasn't supposed to. I mean, it wasn't meant for." "Shut up, James," Nina snapped, her voice strained with both anger and pain. "This is your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to skip the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traceable." My blood went cold at the mention of the board meeting. The same one where I was supposed to present a proposal for a key client, a proposal that Nina had been trying to secure for months at our competing firms. Everything suddenly clicked into place. "The tea last month," I said, my voice steady despite the shock. "And the breakfast incident 2 months ago. Those weren't just accidents, were they?" Nina's face twisted in pain once again. "The tea, that was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation. But you went anyway." She doubled over, clutching her stomach. "James said we just needed to discredit you, make sure the clients thought you were unreliable." The wail of sirens grew louder outside, and James stood up, stepping back from both of us. "Nina, stop talking," he pleaded. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Nina spat, her words slurring. "We've been planning this for months, ever since you started outperforming me at every client meeting. You were supposed to make sure she drank it today." As the paramedics rushed into the room, I stepped aside, allowing them to do their work. As they began loading Nina onto the stretcher, I quickly stopped the recording and sent it to my private email, then forwarded it to my lawyer. James stood frozen, watching helplessly as his plan fell apart. "I'll ride with her to the hospital," I told the paramedics, my tone firm. "I need to ensure my sister-in-law gets the proper care." I glanced over at James, locking eyes with him. "And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee." At Nashville General Hospital, the emergency room was a whirlwind of activity as doctors rushed to treat Nina. I sat quietly in the waiting area, phone in hand, replaying the recording of Nina's confession. The trembling in her voice, the terror in her eyes, it was all the proof I needed. This wasn't just my imagination running wild. A nurse called out, "Family of Nina Anderson?" I stood up, noticing that James was conspicuously absent. He'd mentioned he was going to park the car about 20 minutes ago and hadn't returned. "I'm her sister-in-law," I said, following the nurse through the double doors. "How is she?" "She's stabilized, but we found concerning levels of toxins in her system." The nurse's face was somber. "The doctor will want to speak with you about some unusual findings in her blood work." Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with graying hair and piercing eyes, was waiting outside Nina's room. "Mrs. Bennett, could you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill?" she asked. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. "I think you should hear this first," I said, playing the recording from brunch. As the words of Nina's confession filled the room, I watched the doctor's expression shift from calm concern to alarm. "This is very serious," she said, jotting down notes on her tablet. The substance we found isn't something that would just end up in coffee. This appears to be deliberate contamination. Just then, James appeared at the far end of the hallway, his face pale and slick with sweat. He had clearly overheard the doctor's words. "Christina," he started, taking a tentative step toward me. "Let me explain." "Stay back," Dr. Phillips warned, pressing the nurse's call button. "Security to room 412, please." James raised his hands in surrender. "This is all a misunderstanding." Nina was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. "Really?" I asked, pulling up the messages I had found on his phone last week, messages I had discreetly forwarded to myself. "So these messages between you and Nina about making sure she's out of commission before the Henderson presentation were just casual conversation?" James's face drained of color. "You went through my phone? After I found the strange pills in your desk drawer?" "Yes, I did." I turned to Dr. Phillips. "Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with symptoms we couldn't explain. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Nina's system today." The doctor's gaze narrowed. "We'll need to run some tests to compare." 2 security guards entered and stood on either side of James, ensuring that he would remain available for questioning. He appeared cornered, his carefully crafted facade beginning to break apart. "Nina and I." He stumbled, struggling to find the right words. "We were just trying to help you take a break. You were working too hard, handling all the big accounts. Nina suggested that if we could get you to slow down, it would be better for you." "By poisoning me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fury boiling inside me. My hands trembled, but I kept my composure. "How long has this been going on? Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too?" James didn't respond, his silence answering my questions more loudly than words ever could. Behind him, I noticed Nina's room, where she was connected to various monitors. The arrogance she had shown earlier was gone, replaced by the fearful look of someone who knew their schemes were finally being uncovered. Dr. Phillips spoke quietly, breaking the tension. "Detective Mendoza is on her way. She'll need to take statements from everyone involved." I nodded, feeling an unusual calm wash over me. The truth was unfolding, and there would be no turning back now. Detective Mendoza arrived about an hour later, her presence immediately commanding attention in the sterile hospital hallway. She was an experienced investigator specializing in domestic abuse cases, and she listened carefully as I played the recording from our brunch and showed her the text messages. "Mrs. Bennett," she began, scanning her notes, "you mentioned being hospitalized before. Can you tell me more about those incidents?" I retrieved my phone, opening a document I had been quietly keeping track of for months. The first time was in February after a dinner at Nina's house. I had severe stomach pains and dizziness. The second incident was in April, involving the tea. Then, in June, after breakfast with them, I had another episode. I continued, my voice even. The symptoms were always similar, but just different enough that the doctors couldn't figure out what was causing it. Detective Mendoza studied the log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances I had been maintaining. "You've been keeping detailed records?" "Yes," I replied, "ever since I noticed a pattern." I hesitated for a moment, then reached into my purse to pull out another phone. I started carrying a backup phone with a different number. I used it to record conversations when I was around them. I have several recordings where Nina and James talk about their plans, though they're careful not to be overt. I played one of the recordings for the detective. Nina's voice came through clearly. "The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough." James's voice followed. "I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation." Detective Mendoza's expression grew more serious as she listened. Through the window of Nina's room, I could see my sister-in-law was awake now, her earlier confidence completely replaced by a look of fear, as though she realized the full extent of what they had done. "The hospital is running toxicology screens," the detective informed me. "Dr. Phillips has already found several substances that are not naturally occurring. We'll need to gather samples from your home as well." Just then, we were interrupted by a commotion further down the hall. James's voice was raised in frustration as he argued with the security guards. "I need to speak with my wife," he shouted. "Christina, please, you don't understand. We were just trying to protect you." Detective Mendoza stepped between us, her tone firm. "Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditated." "Premeditated?" James scoffed, laughing bitterly. "We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself into the ground, taking all the big accounts. Nina said if we could just get her to take some time off." "By poisoning her?" Detective Mendoza interrupted, her voice sharp. "That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder." The color drained from James's face. "Murder?" "No, that's not. We never meant to." "Then what exactly did you mean to do?" I asked, my voice unusually calm. "When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen?" James's silence said everything. Behind him, I could see Nina watching through her hospital room window, her face a mixture of fear and calculation. I wondered if she was trying to figure out how to spin this, how to justify months of systematic poisoning as some misguided attempt to help me. "We'll need both of their phones," Detective Mendoza said to the security guards. "And I want officers posted at both doors. No one leaves until we get the toxicology results." Dr. Phillips entered Nina's room, holding a tablet and looking grim as she reviewed the test results. Detective Mendoza and I followed her in, while James remained outside, guarded. Nina tried to sit up straighter in her bed, but the tremors were still evident. "The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances," Dr. Phillips announced in a clinical tone. "Most concerning is the presence of a compound that's typically used in pharmaceutical testing. This is not something the general public should have access to," Detective Mendoza said firmly. Nina's complexion turned ashen. "That's impossible," she responded. "James told me it was only supposed to cause mild symptoms." "Mild symptoms?" Detective Mendoza interjected, pulling out her notebook. "Like what your sister-in-law experienced over the past 6 months. At that moment, the door swung open and another detective stepped inside, holding an evidence bag. "We found these in Mr. Bennett's desk at the Anderson marketing firm," he announced, revealing several small bottles with clinical labels, accompanied by detailed notes on dosages and reactions. My knees began to buckle as the full extent of their plan started to sink in. "You were documenting everything? Was this some kind of experiment?" I demanded. "It wasn't like that," Nina insisted, her voice shaky. "We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't strong enough." "And yet, you continued attending meetings," Detective Mendoza remarked, glancing over the bottles. "So, you increased the dosages. Did you know that these substances could be fatal in higher doses?" The room grew eerily quiet. Through the window, I saw James slumped in a chair outside, his hands covering his face. I took a deep breath as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. "The Henderson account," I said slowly. "It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me gone for good because the client had specifically requested me as their lead." Nina's face twisted in a mixture of fury and dread. "You were ruining everything. I worked for years to build that client portfolio, and then you came along and suddenly, everyone wants to work with you instead." "James said he could fix it." "By killing me?" I asked, the words heavy with accusation, hanging in the air. Nina hesitated, stammering. "We weren't trying to." But Dr. Phillips interrupted her sharply. "The concentration in the coffee you consumed today," the doctor said, locking eyes with Nina, "was much higher than anything we've seen in the samples from Mrs. Bennett's previous hospital visits. If she had consumed it, the outcome could have been catastrophic, possibly fatal." Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer. "We'll need a full warrant for their homes and offices. Also, contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. Find out how they managed to acquire these substances." Nina sank back onto her pillows, her energy draining from her. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "James kept saying we just needed one more try." I stepped closer to her bed, my voice calm despite the trembling in my hands. "Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you were both there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What does that make you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I could hear James being read his rights as additional officers arrived. Nina stared at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Detective," I said, turning away from my sister-in-law, "I'm ready to make my formal statement now." The trial lasted 3 weeks, though it felt like a lifetime. Each day, I sat in the courtroom, watching as the prosecution meticulously presented their case against James and Nina. The evidence was undeniable. The bottles from James' office, the detailed notes on each poisoning attempt, the recorded conversations and text messages where they discussed their plans. What struck me the most was how different they seemed throughout the proceedings. Nina, who was always so polished and self-assured, now appeared small and defeated in the defendant's chair. James couldn't even look at me, his gaze fixed to the floor as expert witnesses explained the potentially deadly effects of the substances they'd used. Dr. Phillips' testimony was particularly damning. She offered a detailed breakdown, showing how the dosages had gradually increased over time, revealing a clear intention to cause serious harm. The representative from the pharmaceutical company confirmed that James had stolen the compounds through a college friend working in their research department. The prosecutor argued in her closing statement that the defendants had followed a calculated pattern of behavior. This wasn't just corporate sabotage, it was a systematic attempt to harm Mrs. Bennett, with a clear escalation that could have led to death. When the verdict was finally read, I felt no joy, only a deep sense of relief. Both James and Nina were found guilty on multiple charges, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words rang through the courtroom. The premeditated nature of these actions, carried out against a family member over an extended period, warrants the maximum sentence. I watched as they were escorted away in handcuffs, my mind swirling with thoughts of how greed and jealousy had twisted two people I once trusted into something unrecognizable. Their business, their reputations, their freedom, all sacrificed in a desperate attempt to destroy me. 1 year following the trial, I found myself standing at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, getting ready to give the keynote address. The irony of it wasn't lost on me. This was precisely the kind of opportunity Nina had worked so hard to keep me from achieving. The Henderson account, which she and James had been so eager to take from me, eventually led to a series of important new clients, positioning me as one of the leading marketing executives in the area. Success, I realized, isn't simply a matter of skill or effort. It's about integrity and cultivating authentic relationships built on trust. I paused, scanning the room full of eager faces, allowing my words to resonate. Sometimes, the greatest threats to our success come from those we trust the most, but overcoming these obstacles only makes us more resilient. After my speech, a few young professionals approached me for guidance. One woman, her eyes filled with ambition, asked how I had stayed composed during such a challenging time. I replied that I concentrated on what I could control. I gathered the facts, followed my instincts, and refused to let fear stop me from chasing my dreams. Later that evening, I received an email from the Henderson client, confirming they were extending their contract for another 3 years. A smile spread across my face as I reflected on how differently things could have turned out if I hadn't trusted my gut that day at brunch. That morning, the local newspaper had published a brief piece about Nina and James starting their prison sentences. I didn't bother reading it. Instead, I focused on preparing the proposal for my newest client, understanding that the most satisfying form of revenge isn't about seeking payback. It's about continuing to thrive and succeed, despite those who tried to hold you back.